We are going to be commencing now. Let me back up a little bit. You know, back in June the 5th of 1942, there was a war going on, World War II, and the war was being fought. At that point, we had come into the war, and we were fighting a war on two fronts, one in Europe, one in the Pacific. And one of the pivotal battles in the War of the Pacific was the Battle of Midway that was fought beginning on June the 5th. They started on the 3rd of June at Dutch Harbor. They were attacking up towards the Aleutians and then in towards Midway. Midway is a tiny little island. It's almost like a sand spit out there in the middle of nowhere. The population of Midway today, I think, is about 40 people. And it's got a big airport on it. And we seized it, and we built the airport there so that we could get closer and closer to Japan to be able to eventually attack the mainland of Japan. Before that, everything was done off the decks of aircraft carriers. And ultimately, we did move our way westward, got as far as the island of Tinian, and that's where the Enola Gay took off, which brought an end to that war very, very quickly. But this Battle of Midway was pivotal, and the Japanese were attempting to get to it because it was key for them to be able to come up to the northeast into the Alaskan area. And so they were attempting to take Midway. We knew that they would perhaps attempt this, but we didn't have any direct intelligence as to what they were doing. But they had a plan because of the way the storms travel across the ocean, that they inserted themselves into the storm and traveled along with it. So they had this entire fleet. They were putting a lot into this. And we were trying to figure out if they were coming. And as we were doing that, they would fly out, and there was one bunch of bombers that went out. Two of the bombers fell out of the formation, got lost because they were in the clouds and they didn't know where they were. And one of those guys did drop down, and he saw some Japanese ships, but we didn't have a coordinated idea of where they were. And this was a very important battle. It turned out to be pivotal in the war. And as these guys were going, and they could only go so far, and then you run out of fuel. You have to turn back, have enough fuel so you can get back. And so very difficult to do. And as they were going, and they were just about to the end of their fuel, and where they would have reach the point of no return, so as they were just out there, the clouds cleared, and there was the Japanese fleet. And then we engaged them in fight for a couple of days and just destroyed. This was one of the death blows to the battles that Japan was able to maintain. And it was just amazing, the pilots who remarked that it was miraculous that all of a sudden the clouds just opened up and allowed them to see that. One time about, 25, 30 years ago, I guess it was, and Gwen and I were taking a group of junior high kids. We were attending the Nazarene Church, and we were taking the kids on a trip to the coast. And we went over and we stayed in a little place at Grand Ronde at a Nazarene church there, and camped out in their church. And the next day we were going to the beach, and wouldn't you know it was going to rain at the beach? Who would have thought? And so we were doing that, and my wife, and some of you are familiar with my wife, and you're familiar with some of her prayers. And she prayed, Lord, if we could just do this, if we could get over there, if we could just have a little bit of clearing at the beach for us. And so we parted from Grand Ronde, and we went over to the beach, and of course we get out there, finally get there, get out of the car, go to the beach, and as we got there, the kids, look, Mrs. Elster, look! And there we were, surrounded by clouds, and here's this one clear spot where the sun is shining through. And we played on the beach, and the clear spot stayed until we left. It can happen. So let's go to chapter 21 of 2 Samuel. 2 Samuel 21, 22, 23, and 24 are kind of an appendices to the account of the first kings. These are the first book of the kings of Israel, dealing with the life of Saul and David. And so we have pretty well summed it up with David, and now we've got a couple of appendices, things that are kind of added on to, oh yes, and there was this that happened and that happened. And so I'm not sure exactly where this chapter 21 fits in the scheme of things. I don't know if it's after David arrived or if it was something that happened after his kingship, but here is the story. It says, then there was a famine in the days of David 3 years, year after year, and David inquired of the Lord, and the Lord answered. It's a very important concept. It's just amazing to me that you go into this, and here's this story, and you can just take it as a story, as an account, as a history, and see this happened and that happened, and oh, isn't that interesting? But there's some amazing truths that are just buried in some of these accounts, and they're not here by accident, and they're not here just for our entertainment. They're here for instruction. And so there was a famine in the land. Sometimes there are weather events that happen, and I'm certain that sometimes there's just weather events that happen. It's because there's weather. But sometimes there are weather events that happen for a purpose. And it can be key. And it can be pivotal. And it can be brought about by the hand of God himself. And it takes some time, sometimes, for us to get the idea. It took 3 years for the children of Israel to have year after year of drought. And when you're dependent upon the rain that falls out of the sky in order to raise your crops, this is very serious business. I have a sister in North Dakota she's dependent upon the rain coming out. They have a ranch, 2,500 acres, and they raise the hay and raise cows and one thing and another. And every year it's something else. If the grasshoppers didn't get them, then the blizzard did. And if the blizzard didn't get them, then a drought does. And if the drought doesn't get them, it's the bankers get them. And so there's always something after the farmer. And so they're very, very dependent upon what falls out of the sky. And it took 3 years of nothing falling out of the sky before they did something. It said, David inquired of the Lord. Finally. And how are we like that, huh? Because sometimes that's the last thing that comes to mind, when it ought to be the first. And it said that he inquired of the Lord, and the Lord answered. We can go with an expectation because the Lord will answer. And so he said this, and it says, it is for Saul and for his bloody house, because he slew the Gibeonites. And it says, and so then the king called the Gibeonites, and he said unto them, it says, now the Gibeonites were not of the children of Israel, but were of the remnant of the Amorites. And the children of Israel had sworn unto them, and Saul sought to slay them in his zeal to the children of Israel and Judah. The Gibeonites. Gibeon, Gibeah, Nob, these are all towns that are a little bit north of Jerusalem, only a few miles. In fact, a lot of these towns that they talk about, and they call them cities, and they were not too far from Jerusalem. And so when the children of Israel, as you recall, we dealt with this a little bit. I gave a recap, but I'm going to do it again just to keep in mind who these Gibeonites were. The children of Israel are to the east, and they're on the other side of the Jordan River, and they're getting ready to come into the land. And the first town that they encounter as they come into the land is the city of Jericho. And they are to come in, and they are to possess the land. In fact, the land that they were to possess, actually, just to get an idea of how little they took of what they were qualified to possess, and especially if you looked at it today, my goodness, Israel is just this little tiny spot on the map. It is dinky, insignificant. And, Syria is a big, and Jordan is a big, off to the east of them. But they were supposed to, when they came into the land, they were supposed to possess everything to the Mediterranean Sea, everything north up to almost Damascus, everything east all the way to the Euphrates River, which means that they should possess the Sinai Peninsula. They should possess everything that's Iraq now, and back all the way to Yemen. And so they only took a portion of it. And when they came into the land, and here's a couple million people that are there, everybody who's in the land is aware that there's something going on. These guys are traveling along, and everybody knows about them. And in fact, 1,500 years, right at that time, they were wandering, there was an Egyptian pharaoh who what was the name of the town? I didn't study on this, so I didn't think about this, but it just comes to me on the moment. He built a temple, and on it he's got all these pillars of the temple, and on it are hieroglyphics, and he's explaining all the people he had encountered and conquered and one thing and another. And on one of these pillars is the clear hieroglyph, and it says, the nomadic people of Yahweh. That's the children of Israel. It's the first mention, oldest mention of the God of Israel, Yahweh. And so they're coming in. All these people are aware of what's going in. And you remember, they have this mandate as they're going into the land that they are to exercise, judgment upon all these people. Because the wickedness of the land had reached a point where God was going to deal with it. And the way he was going to deal with it was by his people, Israel. Not the first time he had to deal with this. We know that several hundred years before that, he came down and there wasn't anybody righteous except one man and his family, Noah. And he destroyed everything across the face, wiped everybody out except for those 8 people. And from them, the whole world has repopulated. So all of these people who are there are recognizing that there's a terrible force that's just waiting on the borders, is going to come in and is going to annihilate everything, and they are afraid. And they begin one by one to defeat one group after another. And the Gibeonites, they got smart. Remember, they got themselves all dirty and old worn out clothes and everything, got their moldy food and everything else, and they hiked the 15, 20 miles to where Joshua was. And they came in, we've come a long ways and stuff, and we would like to make a treaty with you. And Joshua said, no, okay, I'll make a treaty with you. It wasn't until after the treaty was done, after the vows were said, that he discovered that he'd been deceived and that these Gibeonites were just up the road a ways. And they were part of the crowd that was supposed to be wiped out and completely destroyed. He didn't do it. He'd made league with them. He'd given them his word. And so he said, well, since you deceived me, we're going to go ahead and keep our word, but you're going to be slaves. You're going to do all the menial work once we get in and take over everything. And that's what the Gibeonites did. And over the several hundred years, over that period of time, they were kind of integrated into the society. They were not yet really Jews, but they were a part of it. And the Jews fully accepted them and all. But at some point in this relationship, Saul broke the treaty. Now, I don't know, when we get into the account, you might remember back when Saul was chasing after David, and David went to the priest and said, just give me the showbread, and they gave him Goliath's sword, and then he ran away, and then Doeg the Edomite, he brought word back to Saul what had happened, and Saul was just all upset. What's with you people? You think so little of me that you don't tell me, and you betray me in this way? And he calls the priests in, and the priest said, "No, we didn't do that. We didn't inquire of the Lord on David's behalf against you. We just gave him bread." And from their point of view, they just thought David was on a foray for the king. So they're very innocent in this whole situation. And Saul, who he was wont to do, go off the deep end, and he gave the order to go in there and "I want you to kill all the priests." And his servants said, "No, we're not going to do that." And so he turns to Doeg. He said, "Yeah, okay, I'll do it." He went in to Nob, and he slew everybody. He killed everybody and everything. It was all. And so I don't know if it was connected with that he then increased his persecution of the Gibeonites, or if this was another occasion, but at least we know that the king went after the Gibeonites, and perhaps he's figured he'll just take their stuff. They really don't belong anyway. They're second-class citizens. They don't belong. And so he went in and he slew the whole bunch. And this was a festering sore that has gone on for years and years and years. And wouldn't you know it, that sometimes people just don't get over stuff like that. And they kind of hold a grudge about it. Now, I want you to think about this a little bit. The Gibeonites, Gibeon itself was an important city. Gibeon is a little bit north and west, about, I'd say 6 or 8 miles. So it'd be like from here to the overlook at Crooked River, the Peter Skeen Ogden overlook. That's about how far we're talking. Gibeah is a little bit closer to Jerusalem, a little bit over, so maybe just a bit north of Terabon, or maybe right at Terabon, something like that would be what we'd be talking about. Nob, of course, was a little bit further east, and so that would be like, I don't know, go over towards, what is the junction out there on the back road to Prineville? Anyway, we're not talking great distances here. But Gibeon was an important place. By the way, the name of Gibeah means hill. And all of these places were on high spots. And Gibeon itself was a higher spot, and it was an important sacrificing spot. And you might remember from the study in Kings that that's where Solomon went and offered up a huge sacrifice before moving everything to the temple in Jerusalem. And Gibeah itself was often called Gibeah of Saul. That was Saul's hometown, was Gibeah. And he also set that up as his royal capital while he was ruling. That was the center of everything. You might remember Gibeah when we were in the study of in Judges, the 19th through the 21st chapters of Judges, and it was one of the hardest teachings that I've ever had to give. And it dealt with the rape of the Levite's concubine. It was a horrible story. And it ended up bringing about destruction in the whole area of Benjamin. There was just a terrible inner fighting in between the tribes, and they all turned on Benjamin over this thing. And so it was a big deal. It took place in Gibeah. Gibeah was the place where the Ark of the Covenant was for many years. Remember when they brought it back from the Philistines after it was in the Philistines' possession, and they kept breaking out in boils and one thing of another, and they finally said, let's just get rid of it. And they brought it into Gibeah, and it stayed there for a number of years. And I want you to know that these Gibeonites, they deserved everything that the Amorites and the Hivites and the Philistines and the Canaanites and all that, all of these people, they deserved what they got. They had earned it. Sin pays a wage, and the wage of sin is death, and they earned it. And they were due it. And they were all morally bankrupt. They were people of the lowest moral order. They find now digging up urns at one of the sacrificial spots. They find urns with the bones of little children that had been sacrificed, thinking they make themselves right with God by taking a helpless infant and placing it into the burning hands of Molech. I don't care what your motive is. That is just heinous, to offer up a helpless child and to murder it for whatever purpose you might have. We may not offer up our children today to various gods, but we offer up our children to abortion at a horrendous rate. And so many turn their eyes the other way. And we ought not to do that. Everybody in this room ought to be giving something to Oregon Right to Life, or to some group that's fighting this day in and day out. Everyone should do that. We need to be aware of what a terrible thing this is. And the Gibeonites deserved everything that they had coming their way, but they did one thing. The Gibeonites went to the one who had the power to execute them. And they did it by craft, but they got forgiveness. In Luke, the 12th chapter, the 4th and 5th verses, Jesus is talking. And he's been telling about how things are going to come to light. And everything's going to be known. And in the 4th verse he says, "And I say unto you, my friends, be not afraid of them that kill the body, and after that have no more that they can do." Once they've killed you, and they can't do anything more to you. You're gone. And there's no more that they can do, but I will forewarn you whom ye shall fear. Fear him which after he hath killed, hath power to cast into hell. Yea, I say unto you, fear him. At least we have an awareness that we can fear him. Much of the world doesn't even realize. They do not realize the flames that they are being dangled over by a corrupt culture. If you ever want to do an interesting study, I didn't have time to just really go into this. I didn't want to get that far off on a rabbit trail. But do a word study of whosoever. Whosoever. John 3:16, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life." Peter stood up on Acts 2:21, "And it shall come to pass that whosoever shall call on the name of the Lord shall be saved." Whosoever. Revelation 20 gives us a warning. "And whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire." And finally, the best whosoever, in Revelation 22:17, "And the Spirit and the bride say, Come. And let him that heareth say, Come. And let him that is athirst come. And whosoever will, let him take the water of life freely." That is the heart of God. And so when we think that there is somebody who is just too low and too far gone and too out of it and everything else, and not worth even spending another moment of prayer for or approaching, keep in mind that the Gibeonites deserved what was in line for them, but they went to the source. And even today, no matter how far gone somebody is, this is how I can be assured that when the day comes and I stand before the Lord Jesus Christ, and I'll be standing in the crowd, and there are going to be some people there that you just wouldn't expect. Seriously wouldn't expect. Who is the serial killer? Killed dozens of young women. Ended up, he finally got caught in Florida and all. Not Dahmer, he was the cannibal. Ted Bundy. You know, there's a guy who you'd think, my gosh, that's irredeemable. Killing person after person after person. And then at the end, he professed Christ. Whosoever will. There's no plummeting the depths of God's grace. You just can't, you can't go deep enough. We can never understand the depth of God's grace, the extent to which he goes. So that's the Gibeonites. And so David goes to the Gibeonites and says, what shall I do for you? And wherewith shall I make the atonement, that ye may bless the inheritance of the Lord? So I don't want to have this going on. We've got to find a way to heal this rift that exists between our peoples, because we made a covenant with you, and we can't have you holding a grudge against us. So what shall we do? And the Gibeonites said unto him, we will have no silver nor gold of Saul, nor of his house. Neither for us shalt thou kill any man in Israel. And he said, that's David said, what ye shall say, that will I do for you. And they answered the king, the man that consumed us, and that devised against us that we should be destroyed from remaining in any of the coasts of Israel, let 7 men of his house be delivered unto us, and we will hang them up unto the Lord in Gibeah of Saul, whom the Lord did choose. And the king said, I will give them 7, the number of completeness. This is what's going to satisfy it. We're going to need 7 people from the house of Saul. And I can't say that these members of the house of Saul are guiltless in this whole thing. They're all part of the royal entourage. They're beneficiaries of all that went on. They are aware of the things that are going on, and they stood by and there's no account of any of them standing in the breach and resisting the wrongdoing that was about to happen. And probably all of them were alive. We're talking about his children and grandchildren. It says, and the king said, I will give them. But the king spared Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul. Because remember, David made a vow, a covenant with Mephibosheth. He said, I want to do a blessing to the house of Saul, which was unusual because generally the new regime comes in. What do? They go and they kill everybody else who might come and try to threaten their throne. And David didn't have that kind of a heart because he was a man after God's heart. And it said that he decided, he'd heard that, well, Mephibosheth is here. And he said, well, then let's do something nice for him. He was crippled. He'd been crippled since the time he was a child. And so he set Mephibosheth up and had this with him. So he says, I'm not going to take him, but there's these other ones. And it says he did this because, and this is important, the Lord's oath was between them, between David and Jonathan, the son of Saul. Then the king took the 2 sons of Rizpah. Rizpah was the concubine of Saul. Remember, he had Saul. This is how things get out of hand. You know, one person tolerates and the next one embraces. So Saul had a wife and a concubine. So what did David do? He has 6 wives and 10 concubines. And what did Solomon do? He has hundreds of wives and hundreds of concubines. You know, what is 700? You know, says that the Chinese character for trouble is 2 women under one roof. Can you imagine 700? I won't go there. I've gone too far already. So the king took the 2 sons of Rizpah, who was the concubine, the daughter of Aiah, whom she bare unto Saul, Armoni and Mephibosheth. Again, this is a different Mephibosheth. This is what's confusing, is having all these people with the same name. So this is not Mephibosheth the grandson, this is Mephibosheth the son. But you can all understand it, because if anyone in the house on a Sunday morning said, Anthony DeChristopher, who knows how many people come out of the woodwork to respond to that. So he takes the 2 sons, Armoni and Mephibosheth, and 5 sons of Michal, the daughter of Saul. Now, wait a second. Michal didn't have any daughters, or didn't have any sons. You remember what happened? When David was supposed to be rewarded, he was supposed to be rewarded with the oldest daughter, which was Merab. But while he was off doing his thing, Saul changed his mind, because Saul couldn't keep a promise. And so he gave Merab to somebody else, gave him to, what's the name, Ariel. And then later on, David came back and he took Michal, but at some point in the relationship, Michal dissed him. She had a lack of respect for him, and he didn't take that well. And he says, okay, you're not going to have any kids. And he put her away to one side and never spoke to her again. So she had no children. That was the way it was. But somewhere in the scheme of things, as it happens, and the Bible doesn't tell us everything that happened in everybody's family all along the way, but something must have happened along the way to Merab, to the point that Michal is not just favorite aunt to these 5 boys, but she had some part in bringing them up. Because it says the 5 sons of Michal, the daughter of Saul, whom she brought up for Adriel, the son of Barzillai, the Mahalathite. And so David takes the 5 sons. 5 sons. From one family. And he delivered them into the hands of the Gibeonites, and they hanged them up in the hill before the Lord. And they fell, all 7 together, and were put to death in the days of the harvest, in the first days of the beginning of the barley harvest. And Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, took sackcloth and spread it for her upon the rock. And from the beginning of harvest until water dropped upon them out of heaven, she suffered neither birds of the air to rest on them by day, nor the beasts of the field by night. Because quite frankly, their carcasses would not have lasted very long. You would be amazed how quickly the natural events set in and things disappear. I grew up on a chicken farm. We raised the chickens and we processed the chickens and we packaged them and we froze them and we delivered them to people's homes. And we were famous throughout the whole region. But when you are processing chickens, and we would do it at the rate of 50 a day when it was time to process, and we would have 500 chickens, and so for 10 days we would be processing chickens, 50 a day. And we had these barrels. We got them from the service station that grease comes in. So they're just a small barrel about this big around and so tall. And the offal, the entrails, the feet and the guts and all that, would go into these barrels. We had ways of keeping them. We'd switch them out, and we'd put them out on the back dock until we had finished in the 10 days. And at the end of 10 days, I can tell you for sure that the first barrels were really ripe. It was bad. But a funny thing happened. I turned 16. And when I was 16, all of a sudden, I was willing to take those things out and dump them in the desert because I got to drive the car. So I'd load these things up into the station wagon. You close the station wagon up, and you can just imagine how bad this was. And I'd roll down the window and drive all the way, and we go out here, out Antler Avenue, and you go out past 9th Street, where you go out to where the homeless encampments are now. That used to be the dump. Everybody just drove out there, and you found a bare spot, and you threw your stuff on the ground, and then you turned around and came back into town. And that's how we all did it for years. And well, that's not how we did it. We would go and we would drop our stuff, and then we'd go and pick up everybody else's stuff, and my dad would bring it back to the house. A bit of a hoarding problem. And but these entrails, I'd go out there and I'd take them out and I'd dump them out, and it was so hard because I've got the weakest stomach. I mean, there's some things you just talk about it and I feel like I'm going to upchuck. And so it was a major thing. And I'd dump these things out there, and then I'd go home and I'd have to get more barrels, and maybe it'd be the next day and I'd take a load out, And I'd go out to the same spot, and everything I had dumped the day before was completely gone. Completely gone. All the coyotes for 100 miles, they loved us. I drive into the area, you see coyotes going like this, as I came in, because they were so happy to see me come. And so you'd have to fight these things off. And Rizpah's out there, and she's fighting the birds off in the day, because birds can pick you clean pretty fast too. And of course, in the nighttime, the carrion eaters would come in and want to grab stuff and drag you away. It would be really, really bad. And she did not want to see that happen to her children. And so she kept them away. It says then, and it was told David what Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, the concubine of Saul, had done. And David makes a determination. He decides he's going to treat them right. And you know what? When we get to the end of the life and our time is done, I think it is altogether fitting that there be some kind of a service. It's important to do that. It's important to do that for the closure of those left behind, but it's also important to the remembrance of the one who has left us. No matter what their situation was or why, they should somehow be remembered. I can say from personal experience how painful it is, and when something like that does not happen. When my grandmother died, my mother had 4 sisters, and there was a certain amount of enmity between several of the sisters, and there was kind of an uneasy peace with them. And my mom had been over taking care of my grandmother, and then she came home for a couple of weeks. She had to come over home and do some stuff, and so my aunt was taking care of my grandmother, and my grandmother died. And a week after she passed, my mother got a letter in the mail, and it said, it wasn't a letter actually. All it was a clipping from the paper. It was an obituary for my grandmother. And there was no service. She was simply interred in the Rose Cemetery in Portland. And you can imagine how devastating that is to all the sisters and everything, that a week, and not even a phone call or anything like that. It was just throw her in a box and put her in the ground and get rid of her. No service, no nothing. She's done. Goodbye. We had a service. We went up to the cemetery and we remembered my grandmother, and it was an important time for us. And David went and he took the bones of Saul and the bones of Jonathan, his son, from the men of Jabesh Gilead, which these guys had stolen them from the street of Bethshan, where the Philistines had hanged them. Remember when they did away with Saul, and then they nailed him to a wall there in Bethshan. And these fine men of Jabesh Gilead went in and they took those bodies off, and they brought them back to Jabesh Gilead. And it says this has happened when the Philistines had slain Saul in Gilboa. And so David brought up from thence the bones of Saul and the bones of Jonathan his son, and they gathered the bones of them that were hanged, these ones that the Gibeonites had hanged. And the bones of Saul and Jonathan his son buried they in the country of Benjamin in Zelah, in the sepulchre of Kish, his father. And they performed all that the king commanded. And after that, God was entreated for the land. Everything's even. But they did do this remembrance, and that is so important. Well, I titled this message, Righting Wrongs and Slaying Giants. So, as we're getting to this whole idea of righting wrongs, I want us to be aware of making a promise, because that's what this is all about. A promise was made, an oath was taken, a vow, and then it was broken. And sometimes when things are broken at a very high level, an entire nation has to suffer. And so was the case with these people. And so I want to bring to your mind the importance of what we do with our vows. It says in the Bible, in Deuteronomy, the 23rd chapter, the 21st to 23rd verses says, When thou shalt vow a vow unto the Lord thy God, thou shalt not slack to pay it, for the Lord thy God will surely require it of thee, and it would be sin in thee. But if thou shalt forbear to vow, you just don't make the vow, it shall be no sin in thee. There's nothing wrong with not making a vow, but if you're making a vow, you very well better keep it. It says, that which is gone out of thy lips, if you say it, thou shalt keep and perform, even a freewill offering, according as thou hast vowed unto the Lord thy God, which thou hast promised with thy mouth. If you say you're going to do something, you better do it. That's why I read Psalms 15. I found it to be a truth in my life and in the lives of those that I deal with. Remember where that one little verse said, he who swears to his own hurt and does not turn. How many times in my life have I made a statement and then I have to back it up? And it may very well hurt to do it. I think the most egregious example of this was one time I sold windows to a family right down here on Canyon Drive, not far from where you live. And I told the people that the windows would have grids in them, and we talked about it. And I wrote up the contract, and I forgot to write grids into the contract. And they read the contract, and they signed the contract, and the windows came, and they said, where are our grids? And they looked at the contract, and I'd forgotten to write it in the contract. And they had signed the contract, and I very well could have said, look, this is the contract that you signed. Does it say anything about grids? No, it doesn't. Is that your signature? Yes, it is. Pay me my money. I couldn't do that. I said, you know what? I know that we talked about grids, and I know that I sold them to you as having grids, and I know that the price that's involved here included those grids. I said, but I'm going to ask you for mercy because it'll be very expensive for me to put grids in those windows now. It's not so expensive when you're manufacturing, but it's very expensive to do it after the fact. And I said, and so I will give you $500 off on this bill if you will give me mercy. And they sat across from me. And this is one of those places where you have to understand mercy working in your life and mine. Because if you're not willing to be merciful to others, don't expect God to be merciful to you and to bring mercy to your life. And I sat there and I asked them, I said, I would ask for mercy. And they said, nope. They had their parents there even, and they just looked at me like I was the biggest crook in the world. And they said, nope, we want our grids. And I said, very well, I will do the grids. I had to deal with my employer because I made very few mistakes when I was doing jobs. And I said, if I make a mistake, I'll pay for it myself out of my own pocket. And that cost me $1,000 out of my pocket. $1,000 in the mid-90s, when $1,000 was actually $1,000. Lord repaid me, no problem. I didn't hold any grudges against him or anything else, but I couldn't help but notice that 2 years later, they lost their house. It was foreclosed and went. And I thought, perhaps if they had been merciful, God would have been merciful with them. You know, it's something to be thought about. So blessed is the man who swears to his own hurt and does not turn. You make a promise, you keep a promise. You make the vow, you pay your vow, and you pay it as quickly as you possibly can. You make an oath to make sure that what you are saying is true. Deuteronomy 6:13 says, thou shalt fear the Lord thy God and serve him and shalt swear by his name. So help me God. This is the truth. And yet, Jesus made it even stronger than that, didn't he? He says, again, you have heard, if we go to Matthew, the 5th chapter, the Sermon on the Mount, so many things to be had from that. Again, ye have heard that it hath been said by them of old time, thou shalt not forswear thyself, but shalt perform unto the Lord thine oaths. But I say unto you, swear not at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by the earth, for it is his footstool, neither by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Neither shalt thou swear by thy head, because thou canst not make one hair white or black. Tell me about it. And let your communication be yea, yea, nay, nay, for whatsoever is more than these cometh of evil. Let your yes be yes, and your no be no. And so we have it incumbent upon us to live a life that is so true that we don't have to say, so help me God. Because people will know that what we say is true. Now, some years ago when Sophia was just a little girl, this is Ken and Vicky's granddaughter, the story came back to me, and I may not have it all together straight, but it's still good. Kyle and Tasha were teaching them girls about being decisive and being truthful. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. And so they had memorized the scripture. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. So one night they told little Sophia, Sophia, it's time to go to bed. And she said, let your yes be yes and your no be no. This is my no. Let your word be true. Let your oath be true. Keep your promise just as God does. Yeah, I think I have missed something.
Verse 15.
Yeah, I wanted to go John 14:3. John 14:3. Keep your promises just as God did. Do you have it there?
Stand by.
Is it coming up?
Yeah.
Okay. Will it come up here?
Is it not there?
No, it's a black screen.
Let's see.
Yeah. I'm surprised I don't have it here someplace, but I don't. I must have gone right over that. Okay, well, I'll just do it this way here. Then I'm going to go to John, and I'm going to go 14, and I'm going to go 3. And it says, and if I go, this is where Jesus, actually 2 and 3. I like this. This is a promise. God makes promises, and this is what gives us hope and gives us comfort as we do it, because Jesus made this promise. He says, in my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. Because they had come to the point in their life that they know that, you know what? When Jesus speaks, he speaks the truth. He says it, and it is done, and it is so. And they've seen him speak some very remarkable truth at this point. He says, if it weren't so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you, and if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there ye may be also. Promise kept. See, we look forward to those promises. So when we make the promises, whether it's to our little one or to our spouse or to whoever, keep your promise. Vows, oaths, promises. Well, now we go to the next section. I'm going to try and cover it really fast because we are running out of time once again. And we're going to be dealing with slaying giants. And it comes up that we're going to face them. It says, moreover, the Philistines had yet war again with Israel, in the 15th verse. And David went down, and his servants with him, and fought against the Philistines. And David waxed faint. And so this is a point in David's life where he's reached that awkward age where he feels like he's young enough to do it, but reality says, no, you're not. I know that I am at that awkward age, and I'm having to tell myself from time to time, you know what? I need to find somebody younger and dumber and stronger. I'm not going to be able to do this. And I'm slowly learning the lesson and trying to be a good boy. But David went out into the battle, and he can only do so much, and he waxed faint. And I know how it is. I know how it is. I have been there where I just reached the end, and then my legs said, nope, we ain't doing this no more. And we went down. And it says, and Ishbi-Benob, which was of the sons of the giant, the weight of whose spear weighed 300 shekels of brass in weight. The head of the spear weighed 8 pounds. And of course, then you have the shaft and everything else. So you're packing a spear around that weighs 15, 20 pounds. Oh, that doesn't sound very heavy. Well, hold that over your head for 3 or 4 minutes or 5 minutes. Or throw that a couple times and see how it goes for you, you know. And he's the son of the giant. So obviously he was a big, big man. He was impressive, but he was not the giant. Goliath's spear weighed 16 pounds. So he's half the man that his dad was, but he's still formidable. Goliath stood 9 feet 6 inches tall, and it was all muscle and sinew. And this guy, he's probably only, 7.5 feet tall, maybe. Who knows? I mean, we can just make it up because it doesn't say. But I've got a feeling that he was a big man, but not as big as the giant. And you know what? In life, we face certain giants. I want you to go back in your thinking. I'm not going to talk about it, but in 1 Samuel, the 17th chapter, it talks about David's encounter with Goliath. And we remember the story. He's just a kid. He didn't have any armor. And he says, I'll take them on, you know. And Saul says, okay, we'll see how this goes. And tried to armor him up, and it was too much. He says, no, that's too much. He says, I can do better without it. And it says, the thing that I like was about the 40th verse. It says that he went down and he chose 5 smooth stones. 5 smooth stones. And then he went running towards Goliath. And he's swinging that thing, and he had spent hours and hours doing nothing but plinking cans out there while he was watching the sheep. He could put a stone, right in the center of whatever he was going for. And he goes running toward Goliath. He's swinging that thing, and he lets it go, and he buries it in his forehead. I can remember when I taught this part of the scripture, and I was trying to illustrate it. It said that if you think that a stone in the forehead doesn't hurt, you've obviously never hit a June bug at 60 miles an hour on your motorcycle. It's terrible. And of course, we know the story that he went down and then he just took his own sword. David took Goliath's sword and cut Goliath's head off. And it was over, and it was a rout, and it was a great victory. And it really set David's place in the history books. But the one thing that I liked, let's see if I can get this, 44. I want to go down to, I think it was verse 47. All the assembly shall know. Oh, here it goes. I like this from the 46th verse. He's running it. And he's yelling as he's going, "This day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand, and I will smite thee, and I will take thine head from thee, and I will give the carcasses of the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air." Not just you, but all of these people are going to be food. And he says, "And all the earth may know," that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. "And all this assembly shall know that the Lord saveth, not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands." There is a God in Israel. Well, it goes down here and it covers it, and it says that Ishbi-Benob tried to kill David. He was all set to do it, but Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, that was David's nephew, who was right by his side, it said, succored him and smote the Philistine and killed him. He's a big man, and he went down hard. As the saying goes, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. And Abishai did not turn from the battle, but he killed this man. Then we go, and then the men of David swear unto him, saying, "Thou shalt go no more with us to battle, that thou quench not the light of Israel. This is too dangerous. You can't do it. You stay back. We need you to be king." And it came to pass after this that there was again a battle with the Philistines at Gob. And then Sibbecai the Hushathite slew Saph, which was of the sons of the giant. And there was again a battle in Gob with the Philistines, where Elhanan, the son of Jair-Oregim, a Bethlehemite, slew the brother of Goliath the Gittite. And we could go into 1 Chronicles, because this is all laid out in 1 Chronicles again, in the 20th chapter, starting around the 4th verse, and it talks about it. And so we know that this guy's name was Lami. And so it says he slew the brother of Goliath the Gittite, the staff of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. They're still talking about that spear. And there was yet a battle in Gath. So we have 4 different battles going on here. There was again a battle in Gath. And there was a man of great stature. He was another big man. Not as big as his dad, but he was a big man. And they don't have his name. I call him Old Six Toes, because he had 6 fingers and 6 toes in each hand and foot. And he defied Israel. And Jonathan, the son of Shimei, the brother of David, slew him. These 4 were born to the giant in Gath and fell by the hand of David and by the hand of his servants. And you know what? David, as a young man, stooped down at the creek, and he chose 5 smooth stones, because he was prepared that day to kill all 5 of them by himself. In our lives, we have giants who come up and haunt us, and we think that we've slain them at some point, and then they come back. But you know, they're not as big and they're not as strong as they were. And we may, over the course of our Christian life, have to slay more than one giant. But be aware that there's not only the giants getting smaller, but there are those who help us. We have helpers. David had Abisai. And then he had these others that were listed, the helpers. And then finally, remember the battle cry of David, that the battle is the Lord's. Lord Jesus, we invoke your presence and we covet your walking with us day by day. Make us equal to the task, that we might be able in our lives to slay the giants. Make us people of our word, people who keep what we say and are dependable and are helpful. Lord, make us into your people, your children. Pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.